That's it, December 29th, 2025. It's the fourth year and day 309 since the full-scale invasion began. Welcome back to the Daily Situation Report. In today's report, we look at the situation in Kupiansk. There is a video of a Russian soldier who is still trapped in the city center. In addition, there is news about Myrnohrad and an extremely contradictory video that I found from Russia, and of course want to share with you. Additionally, there are a few statements from Trump that are remarkable in several ways. Let's get started. Today's update on Kupiansk is brought to you by Russia's currently most rebellious military blogger, Romanov. He reports that several Russian subunits are still completely encircled in the Kupiansk area. According to him, the affected soldiers are now only staying in very small separated groups, sometimes in mined areas, and have limited mobility and supply options. Romanov plans to gather related audio and video recordings from the surrounded forces. Other regime-affiliated Telegram channels also confirm that Russian units are currently trying to break the encirclement and bring supplies to the isolated units. This shows ongoing tension and operational instability for Russia in this part of the front. Let's examine the evidence now. Russian channels are sharing aerial footage from the Kupiansk area with the claim that they are still in the city center and are holding it under control. And that's probably true. This area of movement that we see here on the Russian side is also roughly limited to this red area here. Russian soldiers are repeatedly reported there, but these are not ones who have a connection to the outside, but rather, as Romanov himself was already able to confirm correctly, soldiers who are trapped and continue to operate here. The Ukrainians, we saw that back then in the area of Druzhba as well. They also trapped the Russian units there and hardly fought them at all. They attacked with drones when they saw any, but they let them starve for ages. Even if there were only about 30 or 40 soldiers left, they didn't attack and didn't go on the offensive. They waited so long until they either surrendered themselves or simply couldn't fight anymore. And only then did they go in. And that's why the battle for what was then called the Rabbit Ears near Druzhba lasted for ages. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians launched a stronger attack in another direction, and in quotes, left these behind. We see a similar situation here with Ukrainians letting them starve and run out of ammunition before capturing them. Because for the Ukrainians, prisoners of war are extremely important and a high priority objective. Because if you can capture these Russian soldiers, you can always exchange them for Ukrainian soldiers, who can then be used again for the defense of the country. Of course, that doesn't work with dead soldiers, but the footage only proves the occasional presence of individual units from an aerial perspective and not a secure, continuous control of the center. Just as I explained earlier. Otherwise, they wouldn't complain about being barely deployable and running low on ammunition at the same time. It shows the Russians are still near the city center, and Ukrainians haven't taken control after nearly 2 weeks to completely drive them out of the city. In the Transcarpathian region, there was an explosion on a section of the Druzhba gas pipeline near the village of Rososh in the Sveljava community. The detonation caused a fire on the main gas pipeline, confirmed by emergency services. The alarms sounded and the gas valve was closed, stopping the supply and containing the fire. So, is everything going according to plan as usual? Let's take a quick look a bit further away from the front. Namely, at an event you might still remember well because it happened about a year ago. Spanish investigators report that the Shadow Fleet ship Ursa Major, which on the 23rd, December 2024, sank off Cartagena with reportedly sensitive cargo. So what exactly is strategically sensitive cargo? These were reportedly 2 VM-4SG reactor cores that were allegedly destined for North Korea. The investigation also reportedly found hull damage that indicated external force. The type of attack and final publicly verifiable confirmation of the cargo are not yet available. However, if the report isn't substantiated, it would significantly impact both sanctions and security policy. And that makes this incident incredibly interesting because who sank this ship? Of course, there are a few speculations, but by now, you can probably guess who it might be. A quick update on Myrnohrad near Pokrovsk. The Russians have now managed to reach the center here. Russian soldiers were spotted at the water, and is the end of the city slowly approaching. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are trying to keep the situation under control and slow down the Russian advance as much as possible. The greatest pressure is clearly coming from the south here, and the Ukrainian forces remaining in the town are only well-known units, as you can see. At this point, I would like to note that these are not 4 brigades located exactly in the town, but rather subordinate units of these brigades. For example, a battalion from each brigade. Otherwise, territory remained unchanged. Remember, this war is no longer what we saw in 2022 or early 2023. Back then, I only made situation reports with major shifts on the front, and I couldn't even mention all of them. Otherwise, it would have gone beyond the scope. Today, I'm glad if we can see 2 or 3 of that size here, but in return, many other things have become very interesting. Exploding refineries, drones, generals falling out of windows, innovations. A president's unpredictability even created a betting category on Polymarket. If you value this channel and want to support independent, fact-based reports without clickbait or excess chatter, you'll notice the reports are typically about 10 minutes, not 2 hours. Feel free to join as a channel member. We have just reached 300 channel members, which is a strong signal and shows that solid analysis and clear context are appreciated. Your membership helps me to keep the situation reports independent, without third-party advertising, and of course to be able to work on them daily. It also helps me control the channel's expenses and daily research costs. For updates after the situation report, click Become a Member. You should already be a free subscriber. I think I found the most contradictory video from Russia, where civilians discuss their lives in an interview. They repeatedly stress they're happy, proud of their country, and wouldn't live anywhere else. At the same time, they also say that they are very worried about their children because their sons are at war, and that they hope the war will finally end. In addition, they also describe massive everyday problems, years of difficulties, with the gas supply so severe that they even considered why. That's the only problem. Everything else is fine, except for the dilapidated sewage system. That, and the war and the gas supply, those are the only problems. Yeah, except for the trash, since residents now just toss everything onto the street. That's it for the problems, since those are the only ones. Otherwise, everything's cool. Well, if it weren't for all the stench from the trash, which is mentioned again at the end. I had to think for a while if that was staged, but it's exactly as it seems. But statements make the inner contradiction clear. Outwardly, loyalty and satisfaction are always emphasized, while in the same breath, war, fear for their own children, and the visible decay of infrastructure are mentioned. Avoid criticizing the system. You wouldn't want to end up in the gulag. And that's the sad part. Russia could have done much more with the war money. What they've spent on the war over the last 3 years, they could have invested in exactly that instead. Into better education, better infrastructure, and quality of life, so that people don't have to dump their trash on the streets. Instead, it was wasted destroying cities in the neighboring country and reducing their population by about 1.2 million men. That's just the fallen and disabled soldiers, not those who emigrated. After his meeting with Zelenskyy, Trump said, yes.
Wants to see Ukraine succeed. It sounds a little strange, but I was explaining to President Putin, generous in his feeling toward Ukraine succeeding.
This statement by Trump is, of course, remarkable in several respects and does not fit the observed reality of the war, as could be seen from Zelenskyy's reaction when Trump says that Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed and that Putin has been very generous toward a Ukrainian success. Is that in direct contradiction to Russia's actual actions? Russia conducts daily airstrikes on Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, and ports, and continues its military occupation of occupied areas. In every known negotiation format, it makes maximal demands for territorial concessions and strategic weakening of Ukraine. A state seeking success doesn't deliberately destroy its neighbor's energy, economy, and civilian infrastructure. Politically, Trump's statement clearly shows the following. He rhetorically adopts the Russian framing, according to which Moscow is not an aggressive actor, but rather a benevolent power player that wants to give Ukraine a chance. While their soldiers have only managed to capture a few meters of ground per day for months, riding horses across Ukrainian fields before falling as well. His critics call the statement one of the dumbest things he has ever said. On the other hand, Zelenskyy explains that Russia is already deliberately preparing the conditions to attack government buildings in Kiev. The remark should mainly be understood as a warning about a possible escalation if Moscow increasingly targets the political and administrative core of the capital. This increases physical damage and also disrupts state functions and affects the population's and partners' psychology. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov accuses Ukraine of attempting to attack Putin's residence overnight and says they are considering their response. Is that why the ongoing negotiations? Do we have yet another reason to rule them out? This portrayal is clearly meant for political maneuvering. An alleged attack on the president's residence is being used as a justification. Avoid dialogue formats, hesitate or prevent them, tighten conditions, or legitimize escalation as a reaction. Just like during the Gleiwitz incident. Thanks to all subscribers, channel members, and the Algo crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renica, Robert Ziller, and Dietrich. Subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next report.